what we really want to talk about today is how much AI is too much, or how do you find the right balance in terms of where to get started with AI. So we'll touch on a kind of continuum or a range of different approaches that you can use, talk about some use cases or examples of those. I've jokingly got a cat here because we all know how intelligent cats are, and they tend to kind of rule the roost at home. But as I say, a cat can't play poker in the jungle because there's too many cheaters. Anyway, what I hope you get from today is just basically some ideas on where you can get started and how you can find your place along that continuum of different AI approaches. So what we'll go through is, first of all, what does good look like? And that's where we'll talk through some use cases and some examples where we've seen good ROI. So these are actual case studies where I've been involved and actually engaged on. We'll talk then about the cost of AI, and cost isn't always just about monetary cost. There's the cost of effort and skills. And what is the cost of doing nothing versus actually building or buying something? And then finally, we'll finish off on how do we get started on finding our sweet spots on that AI continuum. Now, in terms of return on investment and actually achieving results, here are some good examples, primarily from the financial services and insurance space, of where businesses have actually used AI or engagement or customer engagement to actually drive bottom line benefit for the business. So, for example, with the banking customer in these use cases, the challenge they had was actually getting customers to switch their salary to the bank account. So they would sign up for an account with the bank, and the real revenue benefit for the bank is where the customer actually has their salary paid into that account. So using a combination of journey orchestration and some smarts in terms of how agents engaged with the end customer and when they engage with them, they were actually able to see a 167% increase in engagement. The ROI, now these numbers look like they maybe have an additional 0 to them, but it's purely because the way that the program was designed in terms of driving the business outcome, and also the cost of the tech investment that took to actually drive the program. So those are actual numbers, actual case studies, and these were over a 6-month period. But what the important point here is that if you have the correct approach in terms of a clearly defined outcome, the right technology and the right methodology, it'll really help drive ROI with your AI and customer engagement programs. So these are 3 things that are all equally important, but I'll just touch on the clearly defined outcome to start off with, because it's often an area where things go less than ideal, because if you don't have a clearly defined outcome, you're going to be shooting for the wrong target. Now, outcomes typically need to be targeted around a customer goal, and that customer goal needs to be centered around a tangible business outcome, because that helps you when you are presenting to your stakeholders internally. It helps you actually demonstrate that what you've done is actually moved the needle. Your goal could be, or your outcome could be, driven around customer experience, and there are some examples in the use cases where the technique that was used was actually centered around not just moving the customer towards an outcome, but also improving the customer experience. And then finally, the outcome could also be centered around actually reducing the cost to service. And you'll know that often in environments where we've got a lot of customer transactions or high customer volumes, the cost to service customers can be massive. So obviously we can use AI to reduce that cost and still maintain a good customer experience. So just some important points around that. Now, in terms of the different use cases we'll talk about from an AI perspective, on the one side of the spectrum, we've got use cases which are quite, I would say, simplistic. but they're basically built around predefined logic. So we're taking what we know about the customer's context, about their journey, about previous engagements that we've had with the customer, and we've got basic rules that sit behind that to determine when and how and what we engage with the customer on. So not necessarily AI in the traditional sense that we think about it, but still part of automation or a methodology that improves the way that we engage with customers. Then we move on to, more AI involvement, which is, for example, where we have AI supporting our internal teams. Now, that could be a scenario where, for example, we've got AI coaches that are engaging with our sales reps or our call center agents to actually help them decide what is the next best action to take to a customer. Then we have scenarios where AI actually decides. That's traditionally where AI's played a role nowadays, where you've got AI recommending products to customers or next best offer to customers. We have on the right of the continuum a little bit more, risky approaches, but where you maybe need to have a better risk appetite, where you've got AI actually creating content and AI directly engaging with the customer. So we'll touch on examples with 4 of these and just show you how different customers have actually adopted these approaches, and hopefully spark some thinking and some ideas for yourselves. So we'll start off on the far left of the spectrum, and that's basically where we've got predefined logic determining how and what we engage with customers on. And the use case in this scenario is with a business that does employee benefits. So their scenario is basically their customers are organizations, but their customers are also the employees at those organizations. And what happens is when an employee leaves an employer, they have a decision in terms of what they can do, what they want to do with the funds that are currently with this organization. So they can either decide to withdraw their funds, or they can transfer it to somewhere else, or they can keep their funds with the business, which is obviously the ultimate thing that you want them to do. Now, typically, from an end customer perspective, that's quite a tedious process. You have to fill out all these PDF forms. You have to send them through via email. Then you chat to someone in the call center. So it's very time intensive for the customer. It's costly for the business because now you've got call center agents that are having to field these queries instead of focusing on other value-adding work. So it was just an all inefficient, but it was also a missed opportunity for the business, because there wasn't any mechanism to say to the customer, well, this is the actual cost of withdrawing your funds from a tax perspective, and this is the benefit of keeping your money in the fund. So there were all these things that were kind of missed opportunities or areas that needed to be improved. So some of the other challenges they had were, as I mentioned, document submission. So you can imagine sending documents via email, and then someone has to go and get the documents out of that email, input into a manual system, and customer retention, as I mentioned as well, are challenges, and very manual processes. Now, what we ultimately wanted to achieve with the program is firstly to reduce those servicing costs, improve the customer experience, and nudge customer retention. Now, it might sound like something that's very complex and complicated to do. It is and it isn't. If you have the right tech and the right methodology behind you, you can get it done. But what we essentially did in this scenario is leverage, firstly, WhatsApp Business. So now what happens is when an employee leaves an employer, they'll get a message on WhatsApp proactively that will say, we know you've left XYZ employer. What do you want to do with your funds? There's some important points here. Firstly, because it's WhatsApp Business, the chat has the green tick, so the person knows that it's a legitimate conversation. It's also end-to-end encrypted because it's the WhatsApp channel. And we also implemented mechanisms for the employee to actually authenticate themselves using their passport number identification. There was 2-factor authentication. in place as well. So it was very secure from the customer's perspective. We had various different routings in the chat conversation so that, if the person decided to withdraw their funds, we would make the cost of doing so tangible to them, to say like, hey, this is the tax cost that you're going to incur. And if they did decide to withdraw their funds, everything was done via the WhatsApp chat. So they could take a photo of their passport, upload that via WhatsApp. They could provide their bank details via WhatsApp. And all of that was orchestrated in real time via APIs into the backend systems. So there was no more rekeying of data. The customer had this really cool experience where they're doing everything via WhatsApp chat. And ultimately getting their job done a lot quicker. So what we saw here is a massive increase in customer satisfaction, first of all, and also a reduction in servicing costs for just helping customers achieve the job that they wanted to do with their funds. What you also saw on the previous slide, just an important point, is there were also other channels involved. So, for example, we had documents delivered via email to the customer. There was SMS involved for those one-time PINs and authentication. And I also already mentioned that there was real-time exchange of data, which is really important. So just another key point is that often when we think of AI, we think of agentic AI, so chats with customers, and a lot of businesses go through extensive cost to build their own AI agents and chat platforms. But what we saw in this scenario is the customer just leveraged an existing platform that the customer is familiar with. So you're already taking the massive cost factor out of the equation by leveraging something that is already there, customers are familiar with, and just reduces friction. It's one less thing for the customer to install on their phone or to engage with. So just some key points around that. What you would have heard me mention is the fact that through this journey that the customer has, we actually have a good understanding of their context. And I just want to quickly pause, and you might have heard a lot of other people say this, but I don't think it can be iterated enough or reiterated enough. And it's that the fact that AI needs context. And I like to draw a parallel to us as human beings, because obviously we can all relate to that. Now, as human beings, we can think of our brains, and we have all the stimuli that are coming into our brain through our different sensory inputs. And then we've also got our memories, which help ground those inputs and provide context. So if you think of, for example, going on a first date with someone, you'll go on the first date, you'll be looking at the lovely meal that you're eating, you'll be listening to what they're saying, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll have all these inputs, and all of that is going into memory. If you go on the second date and you don't incorporate any of that context into the next date, it's not going to be a very good second date. You probably won't get a third date. And it's the same thing with AI. And when we have AI helping us with our customer engagement, we need to make sure that we have all the data inputs integrated and providing the right context to our AI agents. So when we talk about context and data, where does that context come from an AI perspective? And you probably won't be surprised to see that the context comes from a variety of different sources. So just from a customer engagement perspective, we've got our CRM or our CDP or data warehouse. We've got a whole bunch of customer data. We've got our customer journey data, which could be coming from online channels or physical channels. We have engagement data from various different channels, SMS, email, WhatsApp, etc. We've got transactional data sitting in our ERP, which more likely than not is very difficult to access. And we've also got perceptual data or our customer feedback data, which often is a missing ingredient in how we engage with customers. So these are all really important inputs. And it's not exhaustive, but that needs to pull into our AI and engagement with customers. Now, cool, we have all this data and we have all this context, but you'll probably find yourself facing a bit of a challenge, and that'll be who actually owns your customer data. So you'll often find, for example, IT will be the custodian of those data assets, but actually it's marketing, it's digital. They need to have secure access to that data. They need to have the final say in terms of how that data is structured and leveraged for customer engagement. And that's a thing that's very difficult to actually get done in practice. The other question is, if we can get access to the data securely, so no sending of customer data via email, please, SFTP or API only. The next question will be, how do we know if the data is correct? Because we've got all these different sources of customer data, the ERP, CRM, your CX platform, journey platform, how do we know which one is the correct version of the customer? So these are all really important questions that need to be answered and need to be catered for when you're building an AI program for customer engagement. All right, so moving along, another use case for AI is just where AI actually supports your internal teams. So I mentioned, having an AI agent helping your call center agents. The example that we have here is actually where we built an AI workflow and agent to enrich sales leads that are in the CRM. So a bit of background. Obviously, sales reps, when they're engaging with a prospect, they need to know what is the right offering to go to that prospect with. It often requires a lot of research. And if you've ever worked in sales, you know that it takes a lot of time researching the business, the individuals, and the key stakeholders, etc. So AI can obviously play an important role in terms of helping to automate this. So what we put in place here is essentially a flow that uses multiple agents to go online, do some research about the prospects, about the business, and then provide some context to other agents to essentially do a marrying exercise in terms of this is the business and the potential challenges that they're facing, and this is the business in terms of the value proposition and the sales offering that we have. Bring those two worlds together and kind of pre-qualify the lead and recommend the correct approach for the sales agents to take when they're engaging with those prospects. So it cut down a lot of time wastage for the sales agents. What we also did, and this is really important, is we actually had agents checking agents, because what you'll often find is that AI likes to make stuff up because it likes to please us. So we actually had to have a process in place that went and double check the results and triple check the results to make sure that what was being recommended was actually sound. So the end result was, the sales team members having pre-qualified and enriched leads. Leads were better qualified. The sales team spent less time doing rudimentary tasks. They got the enriched data in front of them. It also helped them focus on the right sales and the right approach to those accounts. So an interesting use case, and you'll see the quote at the bottom by HubSpot, where they also just iterated that teams that use AI-powered sales features in their CRM are 48% faster on average in terms of closing deals. So again, just illustrating that it can be a bottom line impact of doing these things properly. The next example, and probably one of my favorite ones, is where AI actually helps create engagements with customers. So what we call AI enriched engagement. Now, a lot of the examples we've worked with in the past have been around chat agents, but this particular case, and why it's interesting to me, was actually around email. Now, the brief for this project was basically to nudge customers to actually go and submit a lead to show that they're interested in the vehicle, but also to use LLMs to create the email content. So that was basically the core objective. And what you'll see in this example is why I say that methodology is so important. So what we could have done is we could have said, okay, send the vehicle attributes to an LLM, generate some email content, and send the email to the customer. Instead, what we did is, and I'll show you on the next slide, actually built a process or a methodology that makes the email content a lot more compelling. So you'll see some subtle nuances here. The email is talking about the person's family and reliability of the vehicle. It's also being quite specific in terms of the positioning of the vehicles in the email. So if I just skip to the next slide over here, the methodology basically involved taking the data about customers about vehicles that the customer had searched for, and basically using that to archetype the customer. So we said, okay, you've searched for polos or hatchbacks, SUVs, sports cars. Based on that, we're going to segment you as a customer that is searching for a vehicle to do X. And then based on the number of vehicles that were returned, we essentially selected the top 3 vehicles or top 4 vehicles to position them in the email. Now, if I just go back to the slide here, you'll notice that this vehicle over here is the best value proposition, and then the second vehicle is the most expensive. So what we've done is we've actually incorporated what we call the behavioral science agent to actually incorporate behavioral science techniques to craft that email message. So long story short, what you can see here is that the objective was to craft an email and nudge the customer. The methodology leveraged a lot more smarts in terms of how we built that AI process and agent. And that's why I say it's not just the tech and the objective, but it's also the methodology you have underpinning that. So ultimately in this process, we had the email crafted based also on the journey context for the customer. So if they price tracked the car, they would get a specific type of message. If there was a price drop in the car, they would get another specific type of message, all based on how we had archetyped them, etc. So really, in a nutshell, what you saw was that we incorporated the customer context, we leveraged multiple agents, we dynamically selected the email template based on the customer's context and where they were in the journey, and using the, in this case, was the customer journey platform, we submitted those leads straight to the dealer via API. So just another point to call out, and I mentioned hallucinating in the previous example. As I mentioned, AI likes to make us happy. So some of the challenges we had to overcome there were, getting the AI to not invent vehicles. It was actually pretty good at it. Came up with some pretty relevant recommendations, but yeah, we had to put some very specific guardrails in place to make sure that didn't happen. Right, then the final use case is really around what we typically see as AI. So basically agentic AI, where we have agents directly engaging with customers. So the background to this particular scenario is that the business wanted a channel where they could service their existing customers. Now, a lot of us have insurance, and I do have it from time to time where my wife will ask me a question about our insurance, and she'll say, "Are we covered for this?" Or "How much are we covered for that?" And as much as I read my policy documentation when we signed up, I can never remember the answer. So I end up having to go to email, then I can't find it on email, then I phone the call center and I'm on hold for a long time just to find an answer to one question. So they wanted a channel where customers could go and ask questions about their policies and get those answered. They also wanted to do that in a manner that was cost effective, but also that improved the customer experience, because you can imagine phoning a call center. As much as I love speaking to people, you're on hold. It takes a lot of time. So they wanted something that really addressed those three key points. What they did is leveraging, again, a customer journey platform. So they've got full context about the customer journey and the customer themselves. And again, you'll notice they leveraged WhatsApp as well. So they basically leveraged WhatsApp and the customer journey platform to essentially integrate AI into their servicing process. So customers can go onto WhatsApp, they can ask questions about the policy, and based on their specific policy documentation, as well as taking into account the organizational guardrails in terms of the company's policies, would then answer the questions about the person's policy that they have. So all responses are unique, and from the customer's perspective, it feels like they're talking to a human being. And that's really important. Now, just one important point about this one is, if we were in a room, I'd ask everyone to put up their hands, but how many times have you been on a call or chatting with someone and you just know that it is an AI agent, and you ask a question, you're not really getting an answer, and all you want to do is speak to a human being? So something that's really important when you're looking at solutions that have agentic AI is need to have a seamless transition that allows the person to actually, or the customer, to talk to a human being. So in this particular example, that's exactly what was in place. So the technology and the methodology actually allowed customers to move from rule-based engagements where the chat is based on specific rules, like we saw in the first example, through to AI-powered engagements where they're using LLMs. And then where the customer faced issues or wanted to speak to a human being, it would actually seamlessly transition them to speak to a human. So that's important because it keeps the customer happy, maintains that trust, and also reduces costs, because what's often not talked about when it comes to AI agents and chats is that there's actually a cost to generating the content. So by leveraging this approach, they were able to do both. So yeah, just tying back to what I mentioned in terms of maintaining that context and really leveraging LLMs in your customer chats, you'll see that what you need to do is incorporate all data, so documents, so unstructured content, data tables, conversations. You need to keep that long-term history about the customer. So that's where context becomes really important. You'll also need to cater for their recent chats and interaction with the business. And then the other critical thing is, what is the organizational knowledge and context? And what is the interaction style? So what is our brand voice and guidelines in terms of how we engage with the customer? So all of that needs to be brought together and provide as context to your AI agents. So those are the 4 use cases that I just wanted to touch on today. I'll just circle back to this slide, because just to reiterate that ROI is achievable. You just need to ensure that when you're constructing that goal or that objective, it's singular, it's clear to obtain. You have good data and data integration, and we'll touch on that in a second. And also that you're measuring to prove your results. So often when we work on programs, we have a test and control condition, so that when you're presenting back to business stakeholders and executives, you can actually prove that there has been a measurable impact. So onto the cost of AI, I'm going to just maybe pick up the pace a little bit, because I just see that we're getting close on time, and I want to allow some time for questions. Now, I just want to touch on something here, because just to put it out there, the fact that AI for customer engagement is difficult. It's not as easy as, we'll just put an agent there, or we'll use an agent to create this content. It's, as we saw with the examples, AI has nuances that you really need to cater for and be careful of. So just putting it out there that it is really difficult, but you can't just do nothing, because there is a cost to doing nothing. So just some research shows that, organizations feel that, and research shows that there's a 10 to 15% potential lost revenue by not leveraging AI. And you saw in the example earlier with AI agents just enriching sales data and how much more efficient that could make your salespeople. But think about also when you're engaging with customers and making sure that you're doing it in the right way at the right time. There's massive improvements and gains that you can have in terms of getting that right and making it efficient, as we saw with the ROI numbers as well. And a lot of organizations acknowledge that if they don't do anything with AI, they're going to be losing out in terms of the competitive advantage and the gains that they can make. But another key thing is don't fall for the hype trap. So, don't just do AI for the sake of doing it, because you're going to end up burning money. So that's where, working with a partner that has done this before becomes really important, where they're not going to sell you unicorns and rainbows when actually all you need is a racehorse. So some of the challenges that you'll face when doing AI for customer engagement, and you probably would have got the gist of this from the slide earlier, but is really around fragmented data. Because we've got customer data sitting in so many different platforms, you'll also find that your tech stacks are very complex. You might not be a massive enterprise, you might be a small business, medium-sized business, but your tech stacks can still be complex. And things like getting access to data via APIs can sometimes be a challenge, because not all vendors want to provide all the data, or maybe it's not possible. So there's those kind of things to cater for. There's also customer privacy and trust. And Salesforce has recognized that 80% of customers want to know when they're talking to an AI agent, and 80% say that humans should validate AI outputs. So when it comes to engaging with customers, it's really where that moment of truth is happening between your brand and the customer. So you really want to ensure that you're maintaining that trust and privacy with the customer. Then the other thing is just around the operational overhead, and it's probably one of the areas as well that makes this quite difficult, is that we often think that using AI is going to make us more efficient, more effective, and yes, it does, but we need to acknowledge that it also adds an additional burden to us as users. And I actually saw this headline on the TV screen a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it'd be interesting to put in here. But it's just that, managing AI agents and making sure that they're not hallucinating, getting them to output the right thing, particularly when you've got multiple ones that you're working with, can be quite frustrating and challenging. So you need to just acknowledge that and build it into your planning and your programs when you're looking at deploying AI agents. Otherwise, they'll never get to production. And that's why we see, and it's probably not surprising, that of all the AI pilots that typically get implemented, only about 12% actually make it into production. So just important to call that out. And often when we talk to customers and we ask them about, have you adopted AI? A lot of us can say, yes, we have, because we're using ChatGPT to do research or to create content. But that's not proper productionized AI into your business processes. And the reason why this is often a challenge, and I've touched on this a few times, it's firstly your data quality. So is your data actually ready for AI agents? It can sometimes be a lack of strategy. So again, doing AI for the sake of AI versus actually having a clear outcome, very targeted, very niche, that's driven at business impact. That is the proper strategy and the way to do it. It's also often siloed use cases. So you'll have marketing doing one thing, finance doing another thing. etc., different data sets, silos of data. And then also another important one is just, skills. So having the capacity internally to actually deliver on these things, because more often than not, your tech teams and your data engineers that actually need to help you get your data ready or help you implement these AI engagement models are often burned out and burning the midnight oil trying to get other operational things working. So it's not that easy to do something. It's costly to do nothing. But let's just say that you've decided to do something. What is your definition of success? And I'll just circle back to the slide, because it's really important that that outcome is driven around your customer goals, their experience, and servicing them in a cost-effective manner, engaging with them in a cost-effective manner, and around a business outcome. And then because AI needs data and it needs context to be effective, otherwise it's going to do all kinds of wacky things. What's really important is the integration of that data. So what a lot of the research and experience out there shows is that it's not the AI model that you're using that's going to differentiate. In fact, a lot of the examples that we looked at earlier, we're actually using very basic, cost-effective AI models to keep the token cost low. But where we've differentiated is on that methodology and around the data. So it's the data and the integration that is the differentiator. Because if you go and you take AI and you just throw it into your existing processes, you're going to end up with bad results. Whereas if you get your foundations right and your integration right and your methodology right, you're going to get good results. And that's why your competitive advantage is going to come from the quality of your data, the integration, and the richness of the context that you're providing to your AI agents. And that's why Deloitte says that, if you don't have a clear data strategy and you don't have, a unified view of your customer data and their context, your AI projects and results are going to be costly and unreliable. So yes, basically in a nutshell, probably said it way too many times, but it's that context and the integration of your data that gives you a real outcome, not just the raw data on its own. So in terms of the cost of doing something, again, a continuum. You can choose where you want to start. Is it basic AI enrichment? Have you got AI-enabled journey orchestration? Or have you got end-to-end customer to agent agentic AI? The approach really depends on your risk and the cost. So finding your sweet spot is really about your appetite. As I mentioned, your appetite in terms of risk. So do we want AI agents creating email content? If we look at the example with the car website, they actually had an AI agent. It was creating individually personalized emails. So it wasn't just one email template that went out to thousands of customers. Thousands of customers each got their own individualized email. So that can be riskier. You need to have it properly designed. Or do you want something that's a lot simpler, where we've got rule-based engagements with some AI-generated content? It also depends on your appetite in terms of cost, because depending on how intricate and advanced you go, well, that'll determine the actual cost. So in terms of a process to get started, always select your use case in an area that has high transactional customer volumes. It must be very targeted. So with a lot of the examples that I showed, for example, with salary switching or with customer onboarding, they're very targeted use cases with also around specific business units. That helps you prove ROI. Your data needs to be in a ready condition, and it needs to be a use case that is solving a customer pain, or it's most importantly, it's actually tied to a business outcome. For example, customer acquisition or customer onboarding. You need to define your objective around that use case. It must be customer-centric, revenue-linked. And again, importantly, if you can, have a hypothesis and test it. have a test in a control condition, because that makes it so much easier to prove impact. Because often with customer engagement, there are so many different variables that can determine if an outcome is tied to your project. Get stakeholder buy-in, probably an obvious one. Buy-in from the IT teams, the tech teams, buy-in from your executives. But importantly, keep their effort to a minimum. If you need to get support from outside stakeholders to keep their effort to a minimum, do that. Often it pays dividends because they come with an outside view, that they see things slightly differently to how you see them, and bring different areas of expertise. So just keep your team's effort to a minimum. Select an approach that is going to work in your best interest. So avoid vendor lock-in, because just like the car website, just like any other business, they're just trying to sell you something. So focus on an approach that's going to leverage your data to build your competitive advantage. Keep it simple. So focus rather on getting the foundations right in terms of the data and integration, as opposed to trying to build these complex, overly sophisticated AI chats or models. Because if they're built on rocky foundations, they're going to be shaky. And then finally, just in terms of design and execution, the data design, get that right. Testing is critical. You can't over-test with these projects, because particularly when you've got one-to-one customer engagements with AI, the results are always different. So always test. When you productionize, test the outputs and always iterate, because outcomes will change over time. So you need to be able to change your approach and make sure that your program is continually evolving. So in terms of getting started and scaling, I think the key message here is that you don't have to go and build full agentic AI to get the benefits of AI in your customer engagement programs. Hopefully what you've seen today is that you can start with something simple like rule-based deterministic logic to build programs that deliver massive ROI, or you can choose somewhere in the middle where you're actually using LLMs to build content. The key thing is what is going to work for you and for that very specific niche use case that you've chosen. Because what it boils down to is actually delivering business results and an outcome in a more efficient way. So that's pretty much the presentation for today.